I am the managing editor for Shadowproof, or co-founder, and I'm joined by my partner and co-founder of Shadowproof and publishing editor, Brian Nam-Sonenstein. Hello, Brian.
Hey, Kevin. Good to be back with you here.
And we're here to share some bittersweet news, news that is good for both of us, but also means moving in a new direction. And we sent out a announcement to our members and donors and readers, regular readers of Shadowproof today, that Shadowproof is going to wind down and move away from the website and ultimately shut down operations when it comes to funding and producing journalism for Shadowproof.
Yep. Yes, bittersweet is right. I think, I think you and I would have liked to do Shadowproof forever if we could, I think there's a way in which organizations and projects like these are hard to let go of, even when they change and when the times around us have changed and things like that. But I know that you and I have always talked about, drawing things to a close intentionally and doing things when we were ready to, and not, being forced to do it, by terrible circumstances and things like that. So I am feeling, it's like a somber feeling. I'm sure we'll get into this a little bit more, and I'll stop rambling. But I've been thinking a lot about how when we started Shadowproof, I was in my mid-20s. I was living in California. I was in a very different place in my life, and not only have our lives changed pretty substantially over the last few years, but the world that we're living in has changed dramatically from when Barack Obama was president when we were first starting to publish, I believe.
Last year of his presidency,
Yeah.
last year and a half of his presidency.
Yep. Yeah, a lot of I was looking back, some of the things that we were writing about, about Obama's immigrant detention apparatus, and the way that that was going, and I don't know. It's just funny to think back on where things were at, versus now.
Let me begin first before I make any major comments to sum up Shadowproof by saying that one of the privileges of working with you every week was, or every other week, was getting on the phone and checking in and having these hour-long conversations where a lot of these issues, the things you're saying about the world shifting, we would talk about those over the phone. And sometimes we'd have such a good discussion that we wish we had been recording and it was a podcast that people could listen to, maybe minus some of the more insensitive things that we said about people who were upsetting us that week.
Mhm.
But that being said, there was a genuine discussion that we would have as we engaged and talked about what we wanted to do with Shadowproof to address issues that were facing journalists, or how we were going to handle topics that were dominating the news cycle, and whether we were going to pay them attention or just outright say we don't care and continue with some of our more focused work. And so I look at this as kind of like a last conversation with under that umbrella.
Right.
Not that I won't talk to you
again.
I expect to talk to you again. Everybody, you don't have to believe
we still got to process together.
We're cutting off communications altogether here. But yeah, that this could be one of the rare examples that we get to share with everyone of us discussing all the stuff that's happening around us and where Shadowproof fit into that. It may be worth just mentioning very quickly that Shadowproof came out of spinning off of Fire Dog Lake, and that was where I had the opportunity to distinguish myself. That was where you had the opportunity to get into news media work. I was given the privilege of taking over a column after Marcy Wheeler left, and built up the Dissenter there under Jane Hampshire. and was not only exploring civil liberties, but taking it in a direction that engaged much more with the grassroots, embraced protest. It wasn't such a dry kind of discussion anymore. I tried to fold in and bring in movies and music that dealt with political issues or social shifts that were going on, and liven it up as we engaged with national security stories and legal questions that were dominating our conversations. And then when it came time and it was necessary for us to do this on our own, I jumped at the opportunity to be able to work and collaborate with you because I think you could reflect on this time similarly as well. This was what I knew. This was what I knew how to work as a journalist in the space. I wasn't quite sure how else to put my work out there. And so it was exciting. It was exciting to have this opportunity to build or rebuild an organization and continue it and then take it in new directions that we hadn't been able to go with Fire Dog Lake by bringing in, I think the number is somewhere between 50 and 70 different journalists or writers that we collaborated with over the time that we had Shadowproof.
Yeah, actually, I was tallying up the freelancers, and we had over 90 freelancers over the 8 years. I'm incredibly proud of that, in part because they were not just, I think a lot of people, when they think of hiring freelancers, they think of paying them, like a $50 for an article kind of situation. But I think you and I, very early on in our conversations, when Dan and Kit were, a part of the very beginning of the organization, that we didn't want to, I guess, to put it another way, one of the things that I really appreciated about the way that we came together, especially out of the experience of Fire Dog Lake and the momentum that we had, was being very intentional about what we didn't want to be in that media environment. And I think we stuck to that over the years, not wanting to pay people late, not wanting to pay people little bits amount of money, not wanting to do general, coverage of every breaking news item going on, but really dig into beats. A lot of this stuff that I think, particularly at the time, and maybe still right now, but particularly at the time, just felt like, uh, you know, things were kind of like falling apart in the media space. You had already had sort of the dissolution of local media was, on its way. A lot of the blogs that sort of defined political media for that period were sort of falling apart, including the one that we worked for. And there was very much this like rise of the pundit and, a lot of like the Matt Iglesias types out there who just, would sort of act like they knew everything about everything. And I think we always just wanted to be very intentional and focused on our beats. And, I remember, meeting you and getting to know you several times in Washington, D.C. and, getting up to all kinds of hijinks, helping or going to visit John Kiriakou in prison and things like that. And you and I have always had a great relationship. But as you said, I think we have always had a really good dynamic when it's come to politics. I think you and I don't see things exactly the same way in a very good way. I think we sort of complement each other's worldviews and our knowledge of history and, politics and things like that. And so throughout the years and we, Shadowproof, I think existed in a very wild moment in time, the 2016 election, the pandemic, I mean, you name it, the wars, I mean, just sort of the snapshot of time that we went through. I'm just so grateful that of all the people that I could have sort of had that sort of political community with, it was you. And I also have to say, Kevin, that I essentially learned how to do journalism from you. I did some blogging at Fire Dog Lake. I was doing a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and writing about different things. But I think it wasn't until we really started doing Shadowproof and you were editing me and giving me feedback on my first investigative pieces and things like that that I really began to shape a practice instead of, just writing things down and doing reporting. So I do have to credit you, for really shaping that practice for me. And so I'm really grateful.
Thank you for sharing that. I'll return the gratitude by saying that there's not a lot that would have been done with Shadowproof if you hadn't been my partner, because you took on a lot of the administrative duties that people don't get lauded for. We don't write posts about people who do the taxes and the daily business management, but it's essential. And handling donors and members, making people happy, and if their credit cards expired and they need to figure out how to change their billing information, or if they're trying to contact us with something, you're fielding those messages. And sometimes, strangely and not bizarrely, going to our post office box and getting things that were sent to me that made us scratch our heads, like books that were incredibly bizarre. And sometimes, though, we would get things that were really worth sharing. Like, I'm glad you forwarded those materials to me so I could be introduced to those individuals. So it's worth acknowledging our accomplishments. And I made a bit of a list here to, these are things that jumped out at me, and I won't be secretive about how I came up with these. One of the practices we had going through every year was to mark our birth date. I don't know that every organization makes a deal out of when they launched and marks it every time. They might do it on social media, but I don't know if they just like get together and put together a statement and talk about what they've done over the past year. But we're not a business. We were a media organization, but I always thought that every time that we had our birthday, we should look at what we did in the past and sort of think about what we would do in the forward, which is actually a very like kind of corporate CEO sort of thing to do. And we have these posts that are on our site that give people some highlights of what we did year to year. And I just pulled out the ones that really stick out to me as we're winding down Shadowproof. So in 2017, we funded Ken Klippenstein's journalism project on FBI dirty files. And I just bring that up because Ken has gone on to do amazing things and be distinguished and work for The Intercept. But he was coming to us with his FOIAs. He was doing some stuff independently as well. He was sharing stuff just with his own Twitter account, but he was coming to us for support. And I think that's just want to communicate him as an example. He's not the only one, but there's people out there that have gone on to do great work.
Yep.
Like Lauren Gill is working with The Appeal, I believe.
Yep.
And she was doing prison journalism for Shadowproof.
Yeah, I want to shout out to Lexi McMenamin, who is now the editor at Vogue, at Teen Vogue. Was a frequent contributor of ours, so I'm very proud of that. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, you're fine. Go ahead. If there's anything you want to add to what I'm saying, feel free to jump in. But I'm just going to keep going through this. Liz Pelly is now a contributing editor at The Baffler, and she writes about music, culture, streaming, and the internet. I understand that she has a forthcoming book on Spotify and the rise of streaming and what it's done to, in many ways, transform or wreck the industry, depending on how you feel. And she Liz did a number of posts for us, helping us expand our protest music project. That doesn't always come up in our conversations, but weekly we were posting songs from artists. And aside from Liz, I'll say that doing this, whether it was with Liz or with CJ Baker, who has his own project, Ongoing History of Protest Music, which I encourage you all to see because he's creating an archive that gives attention to this work. We were able to often gain recognition from the artists themselves. I can't tell you how many times I was so pleased to be able to go on and see, after Dr. John died, I marked his death by sharing a song that he wrote about, I believe it was a penitentiary in Alabama or something like that. And I saw that his estate had shared the post, but there are various independent artists that would see it and they would take it as something really grand that they were able to promote or call attention to for their fans, and say like, hey, we got the protest song of the week from Shadowproof. And I don't think they were being flip about it. I think they were really proud that they were able to get acknowledgement from our news site. And so Liz would explore how music business structures could be established so that they protested the way that the industry was set up. And she did a series for us. Again, we mentioned Ken with the journalism project. We continued with Freedom of Information Act journalism by collaborating with Camille Fassett, Will Pierce, and Tom Secker. Tom Secker at Spy Culture was a fantastic collaborator to do work with, was always hugely supportive of us. And he get all these documents from agencies on their collaborations with movies and television, and the way that either these national security or military agencies were trying to influence the messages or the actual scenes or the actual story of these productions so that they fit the agenda and politics of these U.S. institutions. And so it's fantastic to be able to bring them in. The Atlantic, of all publications, not one that I celebrate, but the Atlantic of all publications recognized your work. I believe it wasn't me who was covering it. Your work at Shadowproof, covering the prison strike in 2018 that happened.
Yep.
Adrian Corsione worked with us to develop a series on the treatment of trans people behind bars. That was in 2020. And it's worth mentioning that this was ahead of the general panic that we see by GOP leaders in many states, primarily in southern states. But it's at a pitch point, right? It's been very intense all throughout this year. But before we were there, we gave space to them, and they did a fantastic work. Your podcast, Beyond Prisons, remarkably recognized by Elle Magazine in a list of top 10 anti-racist podcasts that year. It was 2020.
Yep.
It would have been the same year of the George Floyd uprisings around the police. And then as publications were shutting down and freelance budgets at many publications were being frozen due to the pandemic, I kicked in some money, and then we matched it by our donors. I matched donors that were giving money, and we put together a journalism project that made it possible for us to hire journalists that were in need of work during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And we put them to work covering the impact on healthcare, labor, prisons, and other areas of society during that time. And so this is outside of what I do. I don't have to sit here and talk on this channel about Assange or WikiLeaks or that reporting. People hear about that all the time. But as we close down Shadowproof, people should know about these things that we were able to do on a very shoestring budget. And I'll just conclude here and then let you get in with some of the stuff that you want to celebrate off the top of your head. But I can't emphasize enough how we set up the business of Shadowproof and working with journalists so that we were always honoring them and making sure that they were treated decently. And we often got praise for our relationships with these writers and journalists that we worked with because we would take their work. Maybe we were slow on edits sometimes, but once we got to the final draft, we would get it published, and we would pay writers or journalists often on the same day. We would negotiate with them and figure out, what was fair to pay you for this article or report. And they came up with what they wanted to be paid by us. They understood that there was a limitation to how high they could go with us, given us being a smaller organization. But we recognized that they were going to do a lot of work. And okay, so depending on the amount of work you're going to put into your article, how much do you think this would be worth? And we paid different amounts. There was no uniform way of paying journalists or writers. There was this one group that consistently asked us, like, how much do you pay for this? And it was always a difficult question to answer because that's not how we worked. That's not how
Yeah.
we operated. And we defied, I think, the publishing model that people operate under. We didn't pay by the word. We didn't pay by um, how many
Like a flat rate.
paragraphs or,
Yeah.
how many clicks. We didn't pay people based on the traffic to their article or
No.
anything like that. So I'm very proud of how we handled our freelancers.
Yeah. No, man, I appreciate that. Some of those highlights, some of those things I hadn't even remembered. It's funny how 8 years both feels like, a month and 20 years. Um, but I was thinking as well about when you started there, before you dug into the list of folks, you were talking about how we celebrated our birthday. And I actually think, I think you were sort of joking. You mentioned there's kind of a corporate aspect to it, but to me, I always enjoyed it because I think, you and I have never taken for granted how difficult it is to run a independent media organization, and there's always the sense of like, well, I don't know if this is going to be around the following year. Like, we weren't bringing in that much money, and most of the money that came in went right back out to freelancers. And so I think in some ways, I think it was an important way to mark, sort of the impermanence of the project, and just sort of a reminder that we should remember what we've accomplished because this isn't going to be around forever. Um, and I think, I think some of the things that you're describing there at the end too, and insofar as we want to talk about encouraging other people who are currently running independent organizations or, who are thinking about it, I think it was really important to us again to experiment against the backdrop of things that we really didn't like in the media economy. And one of the very first things, I think we could even look back at some of our very early organizing documents before we even had a name for Shadowproof, was resisting the temptation to assign dollar amounts to articles, and instead really trying to sort of appreciate both like what it took to put an article together for different people, but also just like what their needs are in that moment, because everybody is coming from different situations, and a lot of folks who are freelancing, especially if they're freelancing full time, like it's incredibly difficult to make a
Yeah.
living to survive doing that. I mean,
Can I add just one quick thing here?
please,
Yeah,
please.
sorry, I don't want to step on
No,
what
no,
you're
no, no.
what you're putting out there, but I think it's important to say that we saw that often people who do investigative journalism don't get the recognition that they
Yeah.
deserve, and it gets eclipsed by people who are just doing punditry, who
Yes.
are giving their own raw reactions in the moment. So let's just take something that we all live through. So let's say the uprising after everyone observed the video where George Floyd was murdered by police. But you have somebody that, as everybody is focused on that news story, they just start acting like they're an expert and they write
Yeah.
something, and maybe they're a good writer, but they don't really know the issue and they're not doing work. They didn't investigate. They didn't
Yeah.
ask an agency for documents so that they can figure out how they protect police officers from prosecution, or what kind of money is going to budgets to make it so that the officers are not investigated, or damage control,
Yeah.
public affairs officers, etc. And so what we recognized is that there's op-eds that are written, there's commentary, and that wasn't as valuable as somebody who spent several weeks reporting out, doing interviews,
Yeah.
collecting information from sources. And then higher on the scale, getting paid more, was anybody who took the time to request documents and really build out a project
Yeah.
kind of an article where it was 1 to 2,000 words and they were going into great detail.
No, I think that's very important to highlight, as well as I think the intention that we had to always try to, one of the things about doing journalism is that you are implicitly giving authority to the people that you decide are the ones to sort of frame and speak on a subject, right? you're sort of involved in a credentialing process as a journalist, whether you like it or not, in that way. And I think by not just focusing on the people who are really embedded in these spaces and these topic areas, but also who have relationships with actual grassroots movements in the streets, who have skin in the game, you know, I think it's one thing to cover an issue for a really long time and, you know which sort of government agencies and things to go to for comment and document. That's all very important. But I think one of the things that we always really try to focus on is like, okay, what are the actual people on the street there who are organizing, who are taking the risks, who actually have sort of this on the ground analysis of a situation that extends well before whatever inciting incident happened. That's where the real story is. And I think that's how, on a whole swath of issues. I know that we're talking about 2020 and George Floyd, but I mean, we were covering the abolition movement for a good 5 years before anybody in sort of the broader populace had ever even heard the terms "abolish the police." And I don't think that is because we were like sage, like genius, we were well ahead of our time or anything. I think it's because we were always trying to fund reporting that was covering community movement organizations that were, for example, to take this example, like trying to find other ways to generate safety and to build lives in their communities without, police and the ideology of police that follows it. So, I guess to bring it back to, any sort of encouragement for other people who might be thinking about starting a very small media organization, which we need more of. I mean, I cannot stress enough that you don't need to start a big flashy nonprofit news organization to do this work. You need a good friend who you can trust and who you admire, and you need obviously a lot of time, a lot of energy to do that work. But I think what's important is to recognize like what kind of intervention you want to make and be really intentional about doing it, instead of just being like, I want to turn out an article every week. I want to, get this many members and have sort of this very sort of algorithmic approach to news, which is very ambient in this space, right? That's, if you look around at a lot of publications, even publications that I admire, including The Appeal, I think it seems very daunting, that you just like, oh, how am I going to afford to, have staff and have, a flashy website and do this and that and, do all the business filings and things like that. I think that we need to really cherish and encourage, and this includes other publishers and people who work in media already. We really, really, really need to make space for people like that who are trying to do smaller work in this space, because I think it's some of the most important work. And even if you're not publishing the most groundbreaking stuff all the time, going back to what you were saying about some of the folks we worked with, you are helping contribute to building a generation of people who are going to go on 10, 15, 20 years after you work together and do amazing things. And I'm not trying to claim credit for Ken Klippenstein's career or Lexi's career or anything like that. I'm just saying I am so grateful to be able to have given them some work and given them a platform to do things that were little pieces of that puzzle, right?
Yeah.
And I think that is such an important lesson. And again, like I really just want to encourage people to engage in these media projects and not feel like they need to turn it into like a full-fledged business and gauge their success on how big and how many clicks they're getting and the consistent monthly traffic, which again was something that you and I never gave a shit about. I don't think we ever looked at our traffic numbers. It was more about like, this is really good writing. This is a really cool idea. This is a really amazing analysis on a situation. And there's a group that no one's talking about. And if we publish something that has a long shelf life and isn't just tied to whatever ridiculous minutia of the moment, then who knows, 10 years down the line, this article might have a lot of impact.
Mm-hmm. And it's worth saying that it's very crucial that we continue to see sites like ours Uh, I'll add Truth Out as being a good
Absolutely.
partner in some of this, and other sites that we need to continue to see people recognize that it doesn't have to be a large part of your income, but
Right.
giving a few dollars of your income per month to some publication. I give to the local Chicago Reader here in the city where I'm based, because it's offered a platform for some fantastic journalists to put out work, cover the Chicago Police Department and other issues. And I think that we need to see people, and that was something that Shadowproof fed into, was promoting the necessity of, if you want media to be better and you don't want it to suck, then you have to be willing to give to these smaller organizations that are going to invest in journalists and writers that give attention to the issues, so that you get the appropriate exploration and examination of those subjects that I think we need in order to parse through all the dilemmas and
Yeah.
conflicts and struggles that we're facing,
Yeah.
that are going to be untangled or not untangled, but no matter what, we want to know how to navigate them. And
Yep.
that's the role that we can play as journalists and people who are paying attention to this daily. And maybe you don't have the ability to engage with it on the level that we do, because you have a daily job
Yeah.
that requires that, or you have children, or you have schooling or whatever. But
Yep.
you can turn to us if you want for a resource, because you could see something happening and go, I don't know how that makes sense. Well, then you can come and read articles on reputable news sites that are independent media, and then you can figure out what it is that you want to do about it, how you want to approach the topic. Do you want to engage? Do you want to go out into the streets and protest and demonstrate and actually go beyond just being somebody who sits and watches some kind of event unfold? And I think that we played a big part of being in the middle of all of that. I want to throw out there that this isn't the ending of Shadowproof is not something that anyone can go around and study and say suggests that independent media does not work. That, like, these are choices that we're making
Yeah.
professionally, because of moments we are in our life. You have a job,
Yeah.
and also, like, I have a lot of other things going on, and we just agreed that it was good to close this chapter of our work as journalists and then let the work that we did with Shadowproof exist. And basically, it'll be in a time capsule now.
Yeah.
And so, as part of that time capsule, I have some mementos to share with people
Oh boy.
as from our time working, that I would like to remind people. And this isn't really anything that we ever had the structure to do as Shadowproof, but I do want to show people that, like, we were part of a tradition that uh, did a lot to engage with people. And some of this is more culture that Firedog Lake promoted.
Sure.
But I just want to take people back
Yeah.
before we
I love
end.
it.
So this was the shirt that was
Yes.
produced that had Chelsea Manning on it. And there was even one without the words that was a red sweater, but I don't have that handy. But of course, this supported my work. This supported the work that I was doing covering the court martial. And it's pretty common now for people to make shirts to raise money for organizations. And that's a kind of something we didn't get around to with Shadowproof. As I show these things from our past, I will say that Brian was always a willing partner when I had these experimental ideas I want to discuss about things that we could do that never happened. But you were always open to them. And I thank you for letting me talk. You guys
course.
don't know the dozen or so things that we discussed that never took place.
I
But
know.
some of them are for the best. Some of them, like, were better, that some things didn't work. But sometimes we would, I think that in becoming independent media creators, that younger people out there who might stumble on this, you need to be willing to fail and
Oh
experiment
yeah.
and try things that are not going to work. We did not do everything correctly. There are sections of our site that looked weird because we started a
Yep.
space for reporting or kind of writing, and it never was populated with content. And so it was easy for people to probably go, what is this about? Are these people serious? And
Yeah.
but that's going to happen because
That's
you're
okay.
trying.
Yeah.
This is Occupy Supply. This was from our time, my time too, but you were involved in this, of going to sites, encampments that during Occupy Wall Street
Right.
needed supplies. And you might
How
remember,
old we are.
you might remember, this is 2011. We're going
Yeah.
back 12 years. You might remember that there were these water bottles that were made.
Oh man. Wow.
I hung on to these because I
Artifact.
wanted to remember these, but we had a union make these.
Yeah.
Jane Hampshire did. And there was all this money that was raised. And then the idea was that we would send supplies to these camps so that they could stay out there and continue to have a presence in these cities, which I think was very good. How about that, Brian? I think this was you.
See, yep.
Just say now.
Years
legalize marijuana.
The first marijuana legalization ballot initiatives passed.
Now that's something we won. Like,
that is
marijuana is going to be legal. It's
legal in like over half the country, and at the time, I don't think we thought it would be happening in our lifetime. But we knew it was the right move. But
here's another shirt with
right.
Again, we had there was so much you could do, right? And then
Yep.
the pot leaf breaking out of prison. The pot leaf is breaking out of prison.
A lot of this went to support John Walker's journalism as
Yeah.
well, who on very many topics, but particularly this one, had very prescient analysis, way ahead of the curve on a lot of this stuff.
And John's gone on to do some good work with various organizations. Early on in Shadowproof, we were publishing his health insurance commentary and analysis that he would.
Yeah, John wrote, before.
Oh yeah, we did a draft bill.
Yeah, John actually wrote model legislation for Medicare for All, back when it was still much more controversial and before any other sort of model legislation had come up in that time. So just incredible to think of.
And then lastly, we have the classic with the logo.
Wow. I don't know.
What started it all.
Yep.
Might have been my first shirt that Jane gave me before we did all these projects.
Yeah.
And I hung on to it. And I'll keep them just because this was at the intersection of, well, not actually, there was no intersection. This was the net roots. And
yeah. Oh yeah.
To talk about what that means today, most people would have no idea what you're talking about. But the idea was basically that citizens could be journalists too, and here were these blogs, and you had the ability to go on and launch these sites. And so we saw with Fire Dog Lake the potential, and then we grew it, and the Shadowproof piggybacked on that success, and then we're here. And I don't know if there's anything as we conclude that I need to give in the way of housekeeping, but what I'll tell people is if you have some kind of particular issue that you feel, okay, I don't understand this and I don't know what happens next, or if you have any particular questions, you could reach out to me and ask me. I will respond to you. If you are a member or donor and you're trying to figure out what to do next, you can go ahead and ask questions as well. I want you to continue to support my work over at the Dissenter newsletter. And the Patreon for Shadowproof is going to change into one that supports my reporting. And then, I don't know, do you want to say, Brian, you're working with Prison Policy Initiative now?
So first I want to definitely echo that I think people should support, if they're not already supporting, Kevin's newsletter. Like I said, Kevin has been a North Star for my journalism But also, I just think that you are covering, and I mean, I know that that maybe sounds cliche to say in the independent media space, but you really are covering stories that I see almost no other people covering with the sort of depth and knowledge, and sort of like familiarity that you do, particularly on this level, and also reporting that is awful at the mainstream level. Just I mean, the one of the areas where it could not be worse, the way that a lot of the things you cover are treated at the mainstream level. So I could not encourage people more to support your work. Yes, if you're looking for me and what I'm up to, I am editing and researching at the Prison Policy Initiative right now. And if you're not familiar, we do a lot of research into prisons and police. So you can definitely check that out. I hope maybe after a brief hiatus to continue working with and publishing the work of incarcerated writers, which we didn't talk a lot about today, but it's also the more recent work that we've been doing at Shadowproof. Yeah,
We'll just go ahead. Like, let's just work it in very quickly here
sure.
at the end here that you helped make possible, along with Miriam Kaba, this Marvel Cook Fellowship for Journalism that took our support for freelance journalists and writers to the next level. I mean, this was, if we were going to continue Shadowproof, this would have been a main component,
Yeah.
because at this moment in this year, and why I don't think it's going to be that disruptive that we're ending Shadowproof, but it's still necessary for us to tell people that it has ended, is because we had moved away from the website, but what we were still publishing on the website were reports and articles from these people.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, so this is another one of those things where I just feel like because this is the sort of the fruits of investing in a beat for a long period of time, and not, and just sort of being diligent and disciplined with it. Previous to the fellowship, we had published some work with incarcerated writers, and at Beyond Prisons, Kim and I had made a special effort to work with incarcerated folks, and get their voices out and their perspectives out. And I'm so grateful. And again, I'm not taking credit for this, but I'm, again, in terms of like throwing my pebble into the pond. There is a lot more now with organizations like Empowerment Avenue and things like that, the Prison Journalism Project, that are helping propel incarcerated writers and their voices into more publications. And you should definitely support those organizations as well. But I had the absolute privilege of being able to have the funds, thanks to Mariam Kaba, to hire and pay very well incarcerated writers from around the country, to write about things that, again, even if they did have opportunities, would probably be limited in a lot of mainstream publications. The beginning of the pandemic, we were publishing incarcerated writers sharing their experiences. And then as the pandemic wore on, that as well. Just lots and lots and lots of incredible work. Abolitionist perspectives from people who are literally in the belly of the beast. And again, like if you are somebody who is thinking about doing this work or deepening this kind of work, this is the kind of slow, diligent work that I encourage you to do. Some of these pieces took over a year to put together from start to finish, because we were literally snail mailing drafts back and forth to each other with like pen markup on them. But in the end, the pieces were fantastic, and I hope to keep them online for as long as we possibly can, because I think that kind of work is incredibly important. And again, a place where, if you identify something like that that's not being done, you can just really dig in and do it. And yeah, so I'm very grateful. And on the website, we've put up a post where we're sort of commemorating the end of Shadowproof, and we list all of our freelance contributors over the years, including our incarcerated ones. And so I encourage, folks to check that out. And if you're a publisher in particular, hire these people immediately and give them work. So yeah, I don't know. Where should we end it, Kevin? What do you think?
Well, let's just go and tell people that if they want to be able to
Yes.
continue to access this work, we will make a small effort to keep a Shadowproof website available with the articles, in an archive that people have been able to read over the past few years. I think we believe that that can be done for a very small amount of funds.
Yeah.
And so we believe that'll be possible. So if you're wondering, hey, it's going to disappear, and I use it to share examples all the time. Let me end on an upbeat, fun
Yeah,
note.
let's end on an upbeat.
Just so I can tell people that one of the biggest joys that I had, something I wrote for Shadowproof that was ridiculous, but
Is this your
happened.
satire?
Yeah, but happened at a time that people were talking excessively about how George Soros was hiring professional anarchists to be paid protesters out in the streets, whether it was like Antifa or going to these George Floyd protests. I'll just use that. I use that very like broadly because they weren't all about him, but I think that's how people understand a lot of what was happening in 2020 when it came to the rebellion. That I put together a post just pretending to be one of those people, and I put up a article that said, and this was the headline: I was a professional anarchist paid by super rich liberal George Soros to bring Trump down. And I went in and wrote a whole bunch about how this sugar daddy and George Soros was not paying and fulfilling the promise that he had made to this paid protester, professional anarchist. And I'm not going to read it. We don't have the time. But what I will say is that over the last 2-3 years, every so often it gets shared by somebody and it'll get like several hundred views, and somebody will take it seriously. It's usually a right winger, somebody with like an eagle or American flag with like a gun coming out of it in their avatar. Somebody who has like MAGA, or it's probably even worse at this point. And they think it's real, and they read it and they believe that it must be true. And I'll just close this by saying that, like, did we have a responsibility to tell people that this satire was fake? I mean, not any more than the Onion has a responsibility to tell people that their articles are not true. I mean, if you believe it, I think it gets to something about the bizarre and degrading nature of the world around us that could be reality, or that somebody could believe that that's a reality. I think it kind of like pokes at the way that people think of things. But without me getting too carried away, that to me was one of the more fun things to come back to over the last 2 or 3 years, as I could watch our articles get shared, and often we can see things that get picked up by people. And yeah, it was just this fun thing. And I ended up doing like 2 or 3 writings about it because there were so many people who, believe this to be true. And I just thought,
you produced like a fake NDA or something like that.
I wrote and it was a thing that at the time that the Onion had done that I thought was pretty cool with, and since I like to deal in actual primary source documents anyways, I made a fake primary source document. And the idea is that like it's pretty ridiculous, and believe me, like when you read this article, I put like foul language and vulgarities and stuff in it, and it's actually kind of horrible to read aloud. Not that it's like it's not offensive to any groups of people, but I'm just saying that like it is the kind of comedy reserved for 11 p.m. at night in a club, while you're sipping an alcoholic beverage and trying to put your hard day behind you. And people still read it and were like, that sounds official. I bet that actually happened. And I don't know. I still laugh at it. Some people would be aghast and fearful and be like, don't we have a
Whatever.
responsibility to put that away? And I said, you know what? Our responsibility was performed pretty well. I covered whistleblowers, you covered prisons. We filled in gaps
Yeah.
that exist and continue to exist and will exist after Shadowproof. And sometimes we had some fun, and it was great to work and collaborate with you.
I was gonna say, I think that again, if there's one thing to maybe end on, and again, speaking to people who work in media and people who are thinking about starting their own media collectives and organizations, we've talked a lot about experimenting and things like that today, and I think it's just so important to make sure that you are giving yourself an outlet to have fun. A lot of the stuff, when you go through 8 years of reporting, in a space like this, not just with independent media, but in the time that we've lived in, it's incredibly depressing sometimes and incredibly exhausting and demoralizing and disillusioning. And I think, again, going back to where we started this conversation, one of the things that I was just so fortunate to have in you as a partner is the ability to sometimes blow off some steam, whether we were just joking around or like ranting on the phone or engaging in funny projects like your satire writing, or maybe veer off and do some of the writing like you did on movies and protest music and things like that. I guess, I don't know, it's not exactly how I want to put it, but like, we have to remember not to take ourselves too seriously if we're going to do this work. You have to have fun. You have to remember that there's a creative aspect to doing this, and you have to allow yourself to engage in that creative nature and not worry about, oh, am I adhering to the things that my subscribers signed up to? And, like, is this going to work for every single person who reads it? Remember that there is a part of you doing this that is artistic. And I think, and I think maybe I'll end it there. Let the creativity flow.
Let the creativity flow. That's exactly right, because often it gets robotic and very life sucking sort of, and you find yourself with low amounts of energy. And in order to keep it up, and these are tasks that you're constantly repeating, what am I going to do? What's the story idea? Plop the story idea down, flesh it out, write it out, edit it some more, polish it, get it to an editor. Then it comes back, revisions, post it. Now it's posted. Okay, it's posted. Now I got to share it with people. I got to post it on like 15 different social media platforms now, because we can't just have one, since the Elon Musk destroyed the one that was really useful to all of us as journalists. And so you have to find some spark that you can take and make it into something more exciting, I think, because otherwise you're doing these tedious tasks over and over again, and you're gonna find ways to convince yourself that it's not worth it. You're going to look yourself in the mirror. There are gonna be days that you wake up and go, I don't know why I'm wasting my time. But if you break it up with these things that allow you to bring your creativity into what you do, then I think you can probably do this for the long haul. I think it's a little bit more valuable and worth it to you. So thank you, Brian. It's been great speaking to you. I'll be here on this channel. People will be here. This was the Shadowproof YouTube channel a while ago. It is the Kevin Gosztola YouTube channel. There will be an array of postings on here. It will continue to have news and politics. It may also veer outside of that. And I'll just ask you all to be patient and understanding, and just don't watch the stuff that you don't want to watch if you don't want to hear about movies and protest music and stuff of that nature that are on the more lighter side than digging into, Gaza or whatever is happening in the world. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for supporting Shadowproof.